Hello, today is Saturday the 18th of October. This is the outlook for the week ahead. So we are due some inflation data this week. However, it's annotated here, but government data may be impacted by the shutdown. So, it looks as though this is going to drag on for longer. So I'm not necessarily expecting the CPI data to come out on Friday. We will see. So with that in mind, the big, the question is whether the gold BTC ratio is bottoming here. It's a decent area that we've come into. So we've come into this area of weekly demand where risk markets rallied around the election last year. We revisited this area back in April when we bottomed, and we're now revisiting it again after this extensive rally in gold that we've seen. So is this the point at which the gold BTC ratio reverses? I think that's a good area to start betting on it. So gold itself, has just been up only since this multi-month range breakout at the end of August. It's just gone up in a straight line since then for a couple of months essentially. So are we now starting to top out here? We've seen this big reaction, gold BTC ratio potentially showing a local bottom or BTC gold rather, and potentially, closing back inside this week's value. So if we do that, we can reasonably assume that we may find resistance at the developing week's value high, and that perhaps gold starts to cool off a bit. And I think we need to see that if BTC is going to start to rally from this area. So I'm not necessarily expecting reversal imminently or this week, but signs that potentially gold is topping out, potentially BTC is starting to bottom. We may be moving into that phase where BTC starts to round out. So be interesting to watch coming into this week, see how gold potentially responds if we get a retest of this area around the developing week's value high. Whether it starts to roll over or form a range is kind of neither here nor there. But we have at least shown some weakness here, losing the developing week's value high but holding the developing month. So we'll see. The big question next week is whether it holds above the developing month's value or becomes rotational on the month, in which case we can start to anticipate a move lower, or at least the start of a range, allowing rolling VWAPs and value to catch up with price, because this has become quite an extensive rally, and I think we've seen signs of froth with people queuing up to buy bullion in Australia most notably, I suppose. Okay, so let's move on to Bitcoin and get on with crypto more specifically. So last week, it's been really good to trade, honestly. This was all garbage. We just had August, September, very low volatility, price moving 0.5% a day. This move, 10% move, took over almost 3 weeks from this low up to this high. So it's just been very slow and choppy. This has been much better. We're just in very impulsive moves, clean rotations. It's been a dream to trade compared to what we've seen, throughout August and September. So, last week we lost the 3-month composite lows, accepted back within the 7-week composite. Nice return into value, and that was a nice intraday trade, which took place over a few hours. So good bottom here for now. Had an attempt to break lower. Buyer steps in, lifted the offer. So we filled out this imbalance up to 107.5. That for me was the trade done, and now we're kind of in the middle of this sort of uncertain zone as to whether price rallies from here or we get another leg lower. For me, this is a bit of a do-nothing area at the moment. We're at the edge of developing week's value. I think we will trade higher based on the fact that we've had this attempted breakdown. We should assume that we trade higher until something changes. But I think this area around 110 is key resistance, right? So we've got the 3-month composite low, we've got the 5-day composite low, obviously the low volume node in here, an imbalance, monthly value low, previous month value low, all lining up in this sort of 110 to 110k area. So, broadly speaking, Bitcoin tends to do the same things when it bottoms. It tends to print 3 drives. You tend to get a slowdown of momentum, which is what we're starting to see. So I'm looking for this to start rounding out, over the next week or two, and potentially for us to come and print one more leg down and print a bottom relatively soon. So we've got the 365 days still trending up. I'm kind of reluctant to take shorts now, but I think there is a potential short setup here, particularly if we fail above the 7-week composite. Then I think you can take shorts, at least targeting the low again. And I will start looking for longs, swing longs, anywhere in this kind of area, below this week's low, essentially. So I would bet on the bottom at the 365-day VWAP. Failing that, looking for a shift condition to happen. So if we shift above 110, it'd be a pretty good sign that things have changed. And then a break of this 5-day composite high would be a very good sign that things have changed. At that point, we're probably reclaiming, 30-day VWAP as well. So I think once that happens, it's very likely that the bottom is in. But for now, I'm not assuming this is the bottom. I think there's a very good chance we leg down again. So just, took the long, but took profit at 107 essentially. So, does this imbalance hold as resistance for now? Do we trade higher? For me, it's largely academic. I'm looking for longs lower, potentially for a short higher up. If it sets up very clear, if we come into monthly val, fail above that 7-week, then I think there's a short there, at least to play this range again. But, ideally, what I'd like to see is BTC just form value here, show that it's lost momentum to the downside, and it's finding some balance, and then perhaps we get one more failed break lower, and that's potentially where I'd look to bet on a bottom. Whether it comes at, whether we front run the 365-day VWAP or whatever, it's just kind of academic to me. I'm just looking for a bottom somewhere around 100k and beyond. If we lose the 365-day VWAP, I think we're in a lot of trouble. This has held as support throughout the whole cycle, really, since we flipped it back in Q1 2023. So, bottoms put in every time at this level. I would bet on that happening again quite willingly as things stand. If we start to trade below that, like for example, if we get a good reaction off it, put in a lower high and then trade below, I think, at that point it's reasonable to assume that the cycle probably is over. But for now, with gold having rallied, we tend to see these short-term dislocations between gold and Bitcoin where they're decorrelated on low time frames but positively correlated on long-term over the longer term. I think it's reasonable to assume that Bitcoin will put in one more expansive leg imminently. So yeah, that's it for Bitcoin really. I mean, just looking for potentially the formation of a range this week, perhaps on this leg. So between sort of 103 and 110k, but certainly 110k resistance. This is current support. Any failed break below that and reclaim probably is a good sign that the bottom is in. That's it. That's all I have to say for Bitcoin right now. Let's just take a quick look at this. So we have, we've really given a good reset of open interest. So I think it's very reasonable to start looking for a bottom, given that daily RSI is back into oversold territory. Last time we were there was back in March and April, right? So it's a big reset. It doesn't happen often that we come into these areas. I don't think you want to be assuming that it's over at this point. This is where you want to be looking to get long, assuming a new leg starts to the upside. So if we're wrong, we're wrong, right? If we lose the 365 days, so be it. But I think the odds are pretty favourable here. Books are favourable for the first time in a long time. We've had this adverse skew, particularly on the spot side, since the highs. We're now seeing more of a spot bid stepping in around this area. So, those two factors combined lead me to think it's probably a good area to start thinking about at least picking up spot exposure and potentially starting to bet on a bottom. Okay, I think that's it for BTC. For this part, I think it's reasonable to assume that alt's bottom during that massive deleveraging. And then what we typically tend to see is BTC showing the line frames before the market starts trading up again. So are we going to see that over the next week or two with potentially another dump from Bitcoin, with alts perhaps holding? Possibly. Dominance, I don't really want to look at too closely. I think it's actually looking quite bullish the way the 30-day, we're trading above the 30-day VWAP, but I don't really want to focus on that. It's not too important to me. Let's take a look at ETH next. Okay, so ETH is trading at this 3-week composite high, 38.50. Hasn't found exceptions within that yet. Found support at previous year's value high, really has backfilled the wick quite well. Could this trade lower? Absolutely. I wouldn't be surprised to see ETH trade down again. As it is, let's get rid of this. So this week we printed 3 days of value, broke down, retested, unable to find re-exceptions back within that 3 days of value, sold off. Still printing lower highs and lower lows. At the moment, unable to accept above this 3-week composite high, and still trading below the developing month's value area low, as well as previous week's val. So, I need to see, I'm not going to start trading ETH over the weekend, but potentially another lower high here before we trade lower, perhaps take out this low, test previous year's value high again. That's one possible scenario. Still obviously plausible, of course, that this is acceptance within this 3-week composite and that we traverse it, in which case we're going to take out this low. I think there are a couple of scenarios there that are plausible. As it is, I'm not willing to bet on the ETH low yet. I would potentially start to think about doing so if we swept this into previous year's value high or here, or if we show a bullish shift and start to reclaim previous value. But again, for now, the 30 has just crossed the 90. It's a downtrending market. We haven't seen a bullish change yet, and therefore, it makes sense to side with the trend for now, although, potentially we're starting to see momentum decline and maybe we're just filling a wick here. So I think for me, it makes sense to be betting on Bitcoin first and foremost. But some signs that, there isn't really much of a sign yet that ETH is bottoming. But I would start to think about looking for a bottom if we retest previous year value high again, or if we test this area where we've got an overlap between this 3-week composite and this previous 6-week composite. Could we trade lower? Could we come and test the 365 day? Possibly. I wouldn't necessarily bet on that, but it's plausible. I mean, we could range and then come and test it later, as we did back in October 2023. It's not beyond the realms of possibility. But for now, potentially starting to compress between these longer term rolling VWAPs. So not too interesting just yet. Looks like more of a range bound market. And when the market's range bound and you've got good BTC volatility, I tend to find BTC is generally the better thing to trade. So that's that. Sol. Yeah, I mean, compressing rolling VWAPs here, unable at the moment to get above monthly value low and the 365 day. So not the best. Attempting to reclaim this very old 3-week composite, which is back from December last year. Needs to do something. I mean, it needs to reclaim here really. Otherwise, it's in a bit of trouble, I think, at the moment. Certainly not something I'd be looking to buy right now. Looks okay, provided it holds previous quarter's value low. I think if we start to trade below that and back into this 8-month composite again, then it's back to sort of 125, and that's not the best sign. So we'll see. It doesn't look amazing. Again, 30 pointing down, probably crossing the 90 this week. I think the best we can hope for Sol right now is that it just starts to range here and starts to round out. But nothing too clear in terms of a longer term swing trade at the moment. Let's take a look at Hype. So kind of similar picture, right? We're sort of starting to compress between the rolling VWAPs. Lots of balance formed, broke down, retested it. It's continuing to break down. So, long period of distribution here. Is this going to continue to trade lower? I think, again, we want to see that 365-day VWAP hold, which lines up with the developing year. And then potentially a reclaim of that 6-week composite low. So this kind of range low, important support. don't want to see it spend too much time below 32. Otherwise, it's probably in a bit of trouble. But yeah, a deviation below there, as long as the yearly VWAP area holds, perhaps we fill out this gap into this kind of area even. It's quite a long way down, but any then subsequent reclaim would be a bullish change. At least play the range, and thereafter we'll see. But essentially, we're forming a really big distribution here. So it's just a big range. So, anywhere in this area, it's probably fair game to start thinking about picking some up. But as it is, still in a downtrend, compressed at this composite high, this range low that we formed, broke down. This looks like another flagging structure before we go lower again. So I think anything below 32 is potentially interesting, just based on this big distribution into this low volume node. Don't want to see exceptions below sort of 32, otherwise potentially in a bit of trouble. Then I'd be looking for at least a fill down to this previous range again, this 8-week range into this high volume node. So that's hype. Right, XPL, I started to pick up a small bag. It's still very much bearish, but having nuked here and then started to balance and trading around the range lows, I think it's a reasonable area to start to potentially bet on a bottom. Needs to show a bullish shift. I mean, first, if you're just being conservative, then let the range continue to form. If it breaks out to the upside, things have changed. As of now, I'm just nibbling at it. Potentially we get a sweep here, fill out more of the wick, but we'll see. Needs to reclaim. This is all pre-TGE stuff, but purely from a technical perspective, needs to reclaim 0.58. Then it should trade up to sort of 75. We've got this POC in the way, but yeah, 58 to 75. Once that's reclaimed, is a good trade. As for now, I'm just looking for it to start to bottom out, reclaim this developing range low, and then a breakout. Maybe this is going to do well, maybe it's not. It's too early to say. But yeah, I'm definitely looking for one or two or more alts to start to catch a bid and show that there's risk appetite in crypto before Bitcoin potentially bottoms. So, as I say, we often get that leg of weakness from Bitcoin while alts have bottomed. So, just worth keeping an eye on the market to look for early signs of leaders. I don't think it's going to be from an old AI coin. I don't think it's going to be from a B2C ecosystem. I don't think it's going to be from the ETH eco. I don't think it's going to be from exchanges. Any L1s of interest? Not really. Can't imagine it would be one of these. Memes, maybe there's a meme in there somewhere that's going to do well. But yeah, for now, not too clear. Most alts still look pretty cooked and they look like they need more time. I can just pick any at random really. Ondo, why not? Let's just have a look at this. This is fairly typical. They've ranged for a long time, but they've been in structural downtrends. So, 30 trading below the 90, and we're now seeing price well below all of these rolling VWAPs all pointing down. I think it's just going to need time. Let's take Pump as another example. Pump's a long way below its 30-day after that nuke. Pretty devastating move. But once we started to break down here, it was a sign of weakness. Maybe this isn't the best example, but nonetheless, lost the 30-day. 30 days in a downtrend, trading below the 90-day, was trading below the 365-day. So the best case, this is just going to take time to round out and allow these VWAPs to catch up. So on that basis, I'm not necessarily expecting BTC just to V reverse from here. I think it's also going to need a bit of time. Generally, we start to see alts rally with Bitcoin, and I don't think they're necessarily ready to do that just yet. I think Bitcoin's going to need more time. Whether it's another week or a month is largely academic. This took a month back in March, April time. So I wouldn't be surprised to see something similar to this, where we just spend a long time chopping sideways, consolidating, perhaps printing a couple more drives down, whether it's one or two or whatever it may be. Possible that this is just going to do a third drive, but 'cause it started to round out, right? Are we going to start to round out here and just trade sideways perhaps this week? We'll see. But I think there are early signs that, you know, the ship is beginning to turn, particularly in terms of the gold BTC ratio. It's just a bit too early to be betting on that with leverage with any certainty. That probably sums it up for today. Let's take a look at some other stuff. The legacy markets. You know, Nasdaq has been very resilient, which is again a good sign, right? It shows that the risk appetite is still there. However, you know, we are continuing to reject from this previous 4 days of balance. So was this Friday or Thursday? Thursday. So we've shifted to rotational on the month. We'll come and look at the VWAP picture in a minute. But tagged into this imbalance, composite highs sold off, retesting again. Is this a bearish retest? Just given to previous week VWAP, but we'll have to find out next week. The fact that it's continued to get bought up is encouraging, but are we just forming a range here perhaps? We'll see. But still signs that the risk appetite is certainly there, it's just not in crypto right now. I don't think that will last forever. Euro, dollar, I think this is a good short. Posted it on Twitter. But, I mean, I'm not going to trade it, but yeah. Clearly displacement below the 30 and 90 day VWAPs, returning into this area of supply, monthly value high capping it. You know, is this a lower high before this starts to trade lower? I think it's very possible. We'll look at the Nasdaq VWAPs in a moment while I'm doing Euro USD. Let's just take a look. I know I'm jumping around. I hadn't planned to look at Euro USD. So yeah, into monthly value high, deviation of previous week's value back into the developing week as resistance, and it looks like this is the bearish retest of the developing year's value high. And this is why I'm interested in this as a trade, because I think if this is acceptance within the developing year, we're looking at least VWAP and potentially, you know, lower. So potentially a big move to come from euro dollar, and obviously if the dollar is showing relative strength, that's potentially going to weigh on the BTC USD pair, which may mean, you know, perhaps we're not going to rally straight away. What's the other thing I was going to look at in terms of VWAP? Nasdaq. So this is obviously just the CFD pair. I mean, it's pretty strong. Previous week VWAP potentially resistance. If we get above that, back to previous week value high probably. Capped at the developing month though. So the monthly is starting to look a little bit shakier. You know, we're over halfway through the month. VWAP's sort of fairly neutral, but pointing down a little bit. Nothing too concerning about it really, which again is good for crypto, well above the developing year's value high. I mean, we could dump into that area. I guess that's about 10% from here. Oh no, not that much, 6%. So we could dump into the developing year's value high, and that would be no issue whatsoever. And very often, you know, you do tend to see a leg of weakness on equities before things start to trade up again. So do we see that? Do we see that correction from equities while BTC shows relative strength? That's very often what happens. I think that would be a good sign that the market is starting to bottom in terms of crypto. Equities, very mixed bag. I think that's enough for today. Others still looks like shit. I mean, let's be objective about it. The weekly looks terrible. The monthly looks terrible. Obviously, the quarter is the same as the month. We're bearish against previous quarter right now. And we've got potential area of support, you know, around 220 billion, which is capped downside in this area all year. But yeah, no signs of it having bottomed just yet, although this wick, I would suggest, is probably going to hold. It hasn't been able to reclaim developing value yet. Not that I would lean on, you know, others to trade alts, you know, trade the chart you're actually looking at, obviously. I'll leave it there, guys, for today. In fact, let's just take a look at MNT while I'm here. Yeah. Not great at the moment. Back inside previous quarter. So 140, 130 to 140 area looks interesting. Yearly VWAP as well, roughly in that area. Yeah, it's still looking pretty bad. And this, Ult's going to be looking pretty bad after what happened last, 10 days ago or so. We need a bit more time. Catch you later.